right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Sekani, a podcast for people in their 20s who are trying to figure out life and not get lost along the way. Today's guest is Ben Ufana, a healer and a teacher whose work focuses on healing, emotional healing, heartbreak recovery, and helping people release unhealthy patterns and attachments. After experiencing a series of destructive relationships in his 20s, Ben began exploring meditation, indigenous healing practices, and Taoist tradition to better understand trauma, emotional wounds, and the body's natural healing intelligence. For decades now, he has helped people heal deep emotional pain and create healthier, more meaningful relationships. Ben, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you on. All right. Okay. So can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right. So yes, I want you to take us back to your early years, right? What was life like growing up for you? And what first sparked your fascination with indigenous cultures and spiritual practices?
The early years were really nice in many ways. It felt like there was kind of a closeness with my mom, and those years felt somewhat magical in a way. And maybe that's typical for children in the early stages of life, as long as it's not overly traumatic, because they're not growing up in a war zone or faced with other extreme circumstances. And initially, in those days, our parents often used the television set as the babysitter. And and when there would be the cowboy and Indian movies on and uh, and many of these movies, you had the cowboys killing off the native people, which was very upsetting to me. I'd be screaming and throwing fits. But the fascination with Native Americans and later other indigenous peoples grew over time and I would spend a lot of time in the university library selecting all these books. I'd come out with whole stacks of books. And there were many that were written, say, between, I think some is it's like 17, whatever, up through the uh, 1840s, 50s, up into 1920s, 30s, 40s, all through there. People who had lived among the tribes, anywhere, missionaries, government agents, and other individuals, and they were recounting stories of that have been passed down from native elders. They wrote a lot of this down, and when I began hearing about the traditional native doctors, I was immediately fascinated. I was just transfixed by what I was hearing and thinking to myself at the time, if ever given the opportunity, this is what I'll do with my life. So by the time I was 17, I'd saved up, bought a car, made it as far as Oklahoma. Um, the United States government had forced a lot of tribes off their traditional lands and into Oklahoma, which they called Indian Territory, except the Kiowa tribe. They were actually their home base was in the western part of the state. So from the time I arrived in this Kiowa community at 17, I started going into the peyote meetings and spending a lot of time with the native elders and it was in one of the peyote meetings that I first met my mentor, Horace, and he was one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. And Horace, during the apprenticeship, would transmit portions of his own healing gifts. But in order to earn the right to work with those gifts of healing, what the native people refer to as medicine, one goes through the vision quest, which typically entails fasting alone in the mountains for 4 days and nights with no food or water, which at this point I've gone dozens of times. So my fascination with the indigenous healing that predates the awareness of much of the trauma I experienced, much of that occurring, I'd say, from late childhood into throughout much of my adolescence. And I
Mhm.
didn't,
Oh,
yeah, I wasn't all that cognizant of the trauma itself. I was actually very dissociated, disconnected from what I was holding inside of myself. It wasn't until now I had spent about, it was during a 3 year span that I was training with my mentor. And I put myself back into college. I needed to reassemble myself. The training was so intensive. I mean, because again, he would be transmitting portions of his own healing gifts and starting the process of going on the vision quest, the 4 days and nights without food and water. I began that while training with my mentor. And but he would have me doing all these other things. Like at one point, he drops me off in the middle of the Hopi Indian reservation in Arizona, and he's had instructed me to hitchhike to Las Vegas, Nevada with $30 in my backpack. Said, make it the best you can. He just expected me to tune into my instincts to know how to survive. And that was actually a very terrifying experience that I forget. I think I was 20, maybe 21, I think just 20. And, but when it came time for a graduation, I had taken about 2.5 years um, to complete a degree or to finish the degree I started, basically. And so as it was getting close to the time for graduation, that's when I began to work with people individually. And that's as that happened, those gifts of healing, that medicine, that power began to awaken inside of me. And in many respects, it's like pouring hydrogen peroxide into an infected wound. And so that's when a lot of the traumas of my that began, well, later in childhood and through my adolescence. That's when all that stuff was surfacing. And I was at a complete loss as to what to do about it initially, other than seek out a psychotherapist. And psychotherapy was very helpful in terms of providing me with an intellectual understanding. And yet I found that the I was continuing to reenact the same patterns that were evoking so much distressing emotion. And I found myself consumed by those emotions to the extent that I wasn't all that functional initially. And so instinctively, I somehow knew to dive into the depths of all that pain I was feeling. And that led me to begin the process of developing a whole series of intensive meditation practices. Initially, when I was, and a lot of the pain arose in response to relationships that were not working. And so when these emotions were surfacing, and at times the pain would be excruciating, but I would dive as far as I could into the depths of what I was feeling, fully immerse my awareness in these powerful emotions, breathing from the center of it all. And and I would, in many instances, do so for hours, but at a certain point, I could feel it breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. It's like all that pain was coming out in waves. And as I continued to work with this process, I could feel it beginning to break apart, to dismantle these patterns that were so deeply entrenched. There are limits, however, to our body and mind's own innate healing intelligence. I would come up against those limits all the time. And so that's when I began to explore any therapeutic intervention that held promise, doing lots of deep tissue body work, homeopathic medicine, colonics, acupuncture, just a lot of different practices. And as I did so, that began to help me to transform a lot of that suffering I'd internalized. But I'd say of all the therapeutic interventions I've explored, the sessions I did with gifted healers, individuals who are working on a level comparable to that which I do now, and also the Vision Quest. Again, the going out the 4 days and nights to fast alone in the mountains without food and water. These two interventions have been the most effective. It's during the Vision Quest, there are times I could feel this extraordinarily powerful presence descend into my body. As that happens, there have been many instances where I would be reliving some of these early traumatic events, as well as some of the more recent adversity that I was experiencing around the time that I was on that Vision Quest. And I would have all the vivid sensory impressions, these memories coming up, the sensory impressions of those lived experiences and all the emotions that arose from them. All that would be flooding back into my awareness. As that happened, I could feel myself literally digesting my lived experiences and emotional responses. And then this new foundation would be taking shape. I'd come out the other side stronger, more resilient. And as it was transforming me from within, then my lived experience, I began to form healthier attachments, attract companions with whom reciprocal love was possible.
Mm. Wow. All right. Okay. You can hear me, right? And
Yes, I can hear you
okay.
fine.
Just trying to take in everything you are saying. Like it's almost relatable. But I would like for us to, touch on the parts of healing, right? So in your experience, what do you think real healing actually look like beyond the motivational advice or surface level possibility or positivity rather?
In many ways, I feel people's concept of healing or what grasp people have of it, especially in our modern day, uh, let's say North America, for instance, it varies. Like you're in Nigeria, right? Am I correct?
Right.
Okay. So in Nigeria, you still have some traditional practitioners that I know there's the herbal medicines, for instance, but there's also some traditional healers that work similar to what I do. And so now here in North America, where I currently am, I do travel to other parts of the world at times. A lot of people think that just by gaining intellectual understanding that constitutes healing. Well, actually, that's only one small part of it. And there's a little more understanding in the sense that people are becoming more aware that they have to work with or process their emotions. I don't know if it's coming through, but there's a siren going off in the background, and I happen to be in the midst of or middle of New York City, and that's one of the unfortunate things about being in my present location. So bear with us. Uh, I do have to admit there are times where I just would like to have something throw at them. It's especially because there's, for instance, on 53rd Street where I'm staying, and sometimes there's the traffic gets backed up, and the ambulance will turn down 53rd Street, and there's all these cars backed up, and it's like you ain't moving. So, can you pick another street? And if the cars aren't going to move anywhere, do you have to blast that ambulance? Especially for people like myself who are recording, either filming my own videos or on podcast. But anyway, uh, yeah, people are getting, there's more insight as far as more awareness of the fact that there does need to be some emotional processing. Yet there's also limits to the emotional processing most people are able to do. When, for instance, when I do my own meditation practice, and the practices that I developed are very different from many other forms of practice. There are thousands of different kinds of meditation practices, but I specifically go dive into the depths of the emotions. And what I find though is when I can sit with my eyes closed and I center my awareness in the depths of what I'm feeling, especially when I can stay with a lot of these emotions for extended periods of time, I'm going much deeper into those emotions. There are times where, nights when I haven't been able to sleep, when I was going through some kind of crazy relational drama, times when, I mean, I've had, there have been times where I've really been in survival mode, such as when the bank stirs. And that's my term for those criminals in the financial industry, for instance, in 2008 and 9, when they crashed the economy, doing all kinds of risky financial maneuvers to enrich themselves at the expense of the general public. And so a lot of people were losing their homes and their businesses, and the bottom was falling out from underneath a lot of us. Our economy was crashing. And and it's like people weren't calling, they weren't scheduling, and I had no idea how to reach people at that time. And so even going through these experiences, there are times like I couldn't sleep a lot of nights, laying in bed, and the anxiety that was surfacing in those moments was overwhelming to say the least. Yet I would just keep breathing from the depths of the anxiety. But I would also be asking myself, saying, some, sometimes repeatedly, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive? And one thing I discovered is that you can direct questions into your subconscious mind. It's best to focus intently, ask the question, and then let it go. At that point, I was just consumed by anxiety, and so the questions would continue to repeat themselves. But that's how I got the inspiration to start the weekly classes. And I did that up until COVID. And then in COVID, we had another big crash in a sense. And because people got to where, and it was heading in this direction anyway, but because people were so holed up in their apartments and homes, and instead of turning out to live events, live functions, they're primar primarily tuning into digital spaces. So I don't have that option to run classes anymore. But uh, still, the concept of healing is so limited in our. I mean, for me, living among Native Americans and even spending time in China, having trained with a master from China and Taoist lineages, connected to several Taoist lineages, training in Xing Yi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, and Qigong, training with a Native American doctor, spending a lot of time in India and Sri Lanka, peoples that, you know, their roots extend much further back. Uh, I think it was like the guy's a monster, Joseph Stalin, but he did have quite a term, rootless cosmopolitans. And I think a lot of us in our modern day Wonder Bread society kind of fit into that category. But it's a lot of healing doesn't go that deep. It's like the many of us can benefit from working with a psychotherapist, and it's an essential component of many of our healing processes. And we need to learn to work with our emotions. But I'll say, for instance, had I not done a lot of the deep tissue body work, because a lot of these emotions are trapped within the body, throughout the body, and the body work would bring this up and bring it up to the surface so I could begin to work with it. And that can be very freeing. It helps to free from a lot of these habitual patterns that we are trapped in when you get the emotions to surface and you actually digest them. And then when I got to work with gifted healers, some of the really powerful gifted healers, and it was helping to transform a lot of the trauma, the other adversity that I'd internalized, I was carrying in my body, and emotions would come up, and working with the practice I described, dropping into the depths of the feelings. You breathe all the way down to your abdomen and expand your abdomen, then your rib cage. Full deep breath, hold it briefly, then exhale completely all the way out. Pause again, and you just continue this cycle indefinitely. Do it with your eyes closed and sitting with your eyes closed, but as you keep doing it, you get to where even with your eyes open, as you're having a conversation with people, you get to where you do it while you're walking or cleaning your house, folding laundry, whatever. Um, but I was mentioning, I got to work with some of these extraordinarily powerful, gifted healers, and that was beginning to dismantle the a lot of the trauma that I was carrying, these distorted configurations that had taken shape within me. And but the unfortunate thing is there's very few people working on this level at this time in history. You're more likely to find them in places like Nigeria or Indonesia or Malaysia or Brazil. And used to be many among the Native Americans, but a few people still practice this now. And that's why I'm fortunate I got to learn from this native doctor from the Kiowa tribe. So because of that, that was one of the main reasons I've relied on the Vision Quest, going out the 4 days and nights to fast without food and water. And I've gone dozens of times, just spring and fall since what, 1993. I've just been going back like clockwork. And so, and there's a deepening process. The fact that I learned from both the Native American doctor and a master from China, and have spent time with some really powerful people in Hindu Vedic lineages, and and what I see with these individuals who have attained mastery is the fact that, throughout all these years, it's just hours of intensive daily practice, and this is how they heal and transform themselves and continually deepen their connection with the higher power and build an ever stronger foundation.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Ben. You mentioned fasting for 4 days and 4 nights. I was trying to imagine I did that. I mean, I'm not sure I'd go a day without food and water. But yeah, like you said, it's part of the healing process, right? So, I just wanted to, ask you this one, right? What kind of impact do you hope your work continues to have in the future?
Wow. What concerns me is that the vast majority of people have never learned to work effectively with their own emotions. And so many of us, starting from childhood, we've experienced a great deal of trauma. And not everyone, but most of us experience significant hardship and adversity. And and we carry that. And and even just a lot of the day-to-day stuff. Many of us are working jobs that we don't really want to be there. We're only there because we have to support ourselves. And so internalizing all this stress and frustration and boredom and everything else. So the practices I teach are so crucial. What I described is just one of a whole series of practices. And so I would, my desire is to impart as much of that as I can so that people can incorporate these practices, and also that people gain a greater understanding of what healing actually entails. Because, again, psychotherapy is a crucial aspect of many of our healing processes. It was for me and for many people. At the same time, if that's all we do, a lot of the trauma, the wounding, we may understand it intellectually, but we're still carrying these profoundly deep scars. And times past, like among the Native Americans, there were many extraordinarily powerful healers, but at this time in history, most of that is gone. There's a lot of these old Native doctors, like around 1900, like 1880, 90, 1900, up to the maybe up into the 1950s or 60s. And they're really wanting to pass these gifts on to the younger generations. And some of them really tried, but a lot of the younger people just weren't interested. They just wanted to assimilate into the dominant culture. A lot of them carrying their own trauma, their emotional wounding, they just didn't want to deal with it. And so a lot of them, these old native doctors took the gifts, these powers that they possessed to the grave with them, which is very sad. When I work with people individually, there's like most people are not going to go spend 4 days and nights alone in the mountains, fasting without food and water. I'll be honest, it's brutal. It's very difficult to get through. But the work that I do with individuals, the healing process I facilitate, has a very similar effect. Not quite as intense all at once, but there's it's gradual compared to the vision quest, and yet it's dramatically accelerated compared to a lot of conventional modalities that are out there. So when people are carrying a lot of this trauma, this wounding, and even a lot of physiological conditions, I'm careful about making promises, but a lot of people that I've worked with, say, injured in automobile accidents, are struggling with digestive disorders such as ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, IBS, a whole range of conditions. People going through breakup, divorce, ghosting, anxiety, depression, just a whole range. So as I work with people, it's taking all this lived experience, all these the emotions tied to what they've gone through that are held in the body, and it's like literally you're digesting it all. Not all at once, but in stages. You're digesting more and more each time I work with an individual. And so gradually you're coming out the other side stronger, more resilient, more capable, greater range of motion. There's only one of me, obviously. And but what I'd really like to see is a lot more people practicing on this level. In order to do that, it's the process one goes through is very intensive. I mean, one actually has to apprentice. And there are still gifted healers in places like Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, other parts of Africa. And if you have the opportunity to, I mean, it's great if you could work with me and other individuals in my capacity. I'm not training anyone. I have helped a few people go through the Vision Quest, but for the most part, I'm not really training. But traditionally, like the native doctors, like my own mentor, they usually only took on an apprentice or maybe a few toward the end of their life. I'm not quite there yet, as far as I know. Um, but I really would like to see more people, more individuals. It's not something that the masses of people are going to seek out, but there's so much more to healing than what most people even comprehend. And so I would really like to see now. It must have been heartbreaking for a lot of these native doctors, approaching the end of their life and knowing that there was no one that they could pass those gifts on to that they possessed. And maybe I'll feel something similar, as it gets closer to the end of my own life. But I do want to see these kinds of practices continue because as I'm moving around, I'm out in different places whenever doing all the intensive practice I do, going through so many vision quests. I'm highly empathic, so I'm standing around people or sitting down with them, and I see and feel what they're holding in their bodies. And and for those who are receptive, I'll work with them and we'll clean up a huge amount of that and they'll become more embodied, more present, more engaged, and they're living more fully. Uh, Not everybody's open and receptive, but that's why I say reach those you can, entertain the rest.
Right. Reach those you can and entertain the rest. Wow.
Yeah,
Right. So, you mentioned these healers, right? They Most of them they don't feel really good because there's no one to actually pass down those healing to, right? So
yeah.
do you think in our generation, like, do you think there's any prospects that there are people interested in, energy healing or, energy work basically?
Well, there is actually, but there's a big difference between this is not something that you could really learn in a workshop. It's there's a big difference between what they call energy work and indigenous healers from these different lineages serve as conduits. Uh, and what that means is that they have other forces or beings that descend into their body. So say like I'll be working with someone and they're laying on the table and some people feel sensations of reconstruction of damaged or diseased tissue within the body, that is doing corrective work within the body itself, or some people actually describe the sensations of hands working within the body. So this is a very different level. There are a number of uh, not sure what I should even call them. There are a lot of things marketed, these kind of energy work things where you go through a few weekends or maybe a month or something, and now you're supposedly a healer. But it takes so much more than that. And what concerns me though is that and my intention is not to put anyone or anything down. It's just you look at the different professions, whether it's modern allopathic medicine, just to name a few, and one goes through years of intensive training in order to gain the knowledge and develop the skill sets, the proficiency to, say, practice medicine or dentistry or anything. So, and yet people thinking they're going to be a healer after a few weekends or a month or so, or mm, people thinking that they're shamans and they've never even spent time among any indigenous people just because they've gone through some month long or weekend or whatever week long workshop. And I use the term insta shamans, but it's really sad because a lot of what they're teaching or a lot of what these people are doing really doesn't resemble in any way what the indigenous peoples have done for thousands of years. And they don't possess that knowledge. They don't possess those powers. They're not conduits who have the capacity to access these kinds of forces or beings to work through them. So, and yeah, and I know for a lot of people in our mainstream, modern day world, they've never experienced anything like this. Some people call themselves skeptics, and I mean, I actually consider myself very skeptical, but a lot of people confuse closed-minded idiocy with skepticism. For me, skepticism means you reserve judgment. I am going to reserve judgment until I go in and experience this firsthand. I want to see what's there, if it holds any validity, if I if I'm investigating it thoroughly and I find that it has no real use or benefit, or maybe just marginal improvement or minimal, then I write it off. But because I carried so much trauma myself, I just I was suffering pretty badly. It's like, oh, I can't live like this. It's unacceptable. I got to do something. This has got to heal. And I mean, it was so bad. I didn't want to live. It was the pain was that bad. So I was determined to ex find whatever worked. I was willing to explore any therapeutic intervention that held promise, and I would go into it, and just monitor closely how I was changing, and I would give it enough time to actually see if it worked. For instance, if you were to take some kind of medicinal herbs or supplements that are actually very effective for addressing specific kinds of conditions or health concerns, and what happens if you take it one time? Probably not much. You may not notice anything, and so, a number of these modalities, I did feel things immediately, but what I found is by being consistent. Take for instance, when I was doing the body work, each time I go back to do another session, I could feel more of that chronic muscular body armor being broken down and more of the emotions surfacing. And then every time I got to work with one of these healers, for instance, and I could feel that it was bringing up lots more emotion, and then I was feeling myself like a lot of this trauma, this wounding being transformed. I could feel myself digesting it. I was noticing the difference as I was getting out in the world and interacting with people, and also doing the vision quests. I kept going, and and every time I go, I'm continually as I get out in the world, I'm just watching closely, seeing, feeling, like, wow, how are people responding to me now? And I'm very cognizant of my limitations to my own range of motion where I come up against the wall. And so I could feel that additional capacity as I keep taking these steps. And that's similar to how, say in the Taoist and the yogic lineages, and even these Native Americans, as you continue the discipline, you continue to practice, you just keep building. You build that foundation stronger, you deepen your connection with the higher power, you become more resilient. So it's in all these lineages, it's a process of continually building the foundation, deepening your connection.
Wow, continually building. All right. So first of all, I want to say thank you, Ben, for sharing your story with us today. I feel like a whole lot of our listeners can be able to, resonate with some parts of your stories that you told us, right? And finally, I just want you to talk to someone out there, from a healer, right, to someone who is in their 20s, who are probably feeling lost, overwhelmed, or in pains, right? Because I mean, some people are in pains emotionally and mentally, and they do not even know what to do, specifically my generation, probably through grief or heartbreak or even divorce, right? So, what advice do you have for them? And yeah, what do you think, they need to hear today to help them keep going, basically?
Healing is a very complex, deeply involved process. It takes commitment, dedication, follow through. And the fact that many of us spend so much time on our devices and we're scrolling, and it's literally rewires our brain. It changes the biochemical makeup of our brains, continually firing off the brain's dopamine reward cycle. So our tendency is we skitter along the surface of reality. We're losing that capacity for sustained focus, attention, depth. And so it's going to take a real concerted effort. So cut down on the amount of digital consumption uh, on your feeds, your devices, and again, healing is a multi-layered, complex, deeply involved process. So some of us will need, for instance, to work with a psychotherapist. Uh, we could watch, listen to YouTube videos and podcasts, but the fact is, if we're starting out and we have a very limited understanding, just developing a vocabulary of therapy speak is not going to carry us that far, and we risk going down all kinds of rabbit holes. So if you have an actual therapist who's doing their own work as well. That can be of great benefit. Make use of additional interventions, because we can't do it all on our own. Now, the practice that I shared earlier, like acknowledge what's happening. What do you feel in response to it? If you're going through a breakup, a divorce, uh, if you're struggling in other areas of life, financial insecurity, or your job sucks, or whatever, other experiences of grief, loss, hardship, acknowledge what's happening. What do you feel in response to it? Where are the feelings situated in your body? Drop into the depths of those feelings. Keep breathing very softly, very deeply. Allow the feelings and sensations. Keep following them as they go through their progression. And some things, like you're in the midst of a devastating breakup, and that pain can persist. And sometimes for weeks or months, but let it run its course. Just keep working with it. Other things, minor disappointment, somebody didn't return your call, maybe you work through that in 15 minutes. Um, and again, interventions. Make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions in addition to psychotherapy. For instance, deep tissue body work can be very helpful to dislodge, free up a lot of the stress and emotion stored all throughout your body, the musculature. And those emotions come up, you can work with the practice I just described, breathing into them. If you have the opportunity to work with gifted healers such as myself, that could be especially valuable. It's of all the therapeutic interventions I found, the sessions I did with gifted healers and the Vision Quest have by far been the most powerful. And it's depending on where you live, there's going to be different therapeutic interventions available. There's things like deep tissue or sensory deprivation flotation tanks. And, I find that time I've spent, in the sensory deprivation flotation tanks, that I would drop into these profoundly deep states, and a lot of the stresses and emotions, it would take my meditation state a lot deeper. And then even things like homeopathic medicine, if you have a good homeopath that can prepare remedies that can help to surface a lot of these emotions and help your system to process what you're carrying, it also helps to support the body physiologically in its healing process, whatever the different physiological issues you may be experiencing. Acupuncture can help to address a lot of physiological issues, as well as to create that balance or homeostasis, as my work does that too. Just different tools, resources, but make use of the most effective. Do your practice. You need to be doing practice every day, and make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions.
Mm. Okay, daily practice, and also, like you said, making use of some homeotherapeutic interventions. Right. So thank you, Ben. I think this has been an amazing conversation. And yes, I believe people would learn a lot, right? Specifically young adults, because most of us we're going through so much, right? We do not know where to start from and how to, just regulate our emotions and get past whatever it is we are going through, right? So this is the sole reason for podcasts like this, so we can listen to it, and know what is the next step to take. That was why I asked that question earlier on. So yes, thank you, Ben. And this has been insightful. I would say personally, I learned a lot, right? And finally, before you go, where can listeners get to, learn more about you, connect with you, and also, learn more about healing, basically?
My main website is just my name, benoofana.com.
Mhm.
And there are many articles that I've posted, articles and videos, so you can do a deep dive and explore. There is a contact form there if you want to reach out to me. I do respond to messages, so if you don't hear back, just message me again. But and there's my website, teachmetomeditate.com. where I go in depth describing a lot of these practices, and I can work with people individually, whether remotely at a distance over the phone and in person, which is even much more powerful. I have two courses that I've released. Breakup First Aid for those who are in the midst of a devastating breakup or divorce, if you've been ghosted. It's about getting you through the initial shock, the devastation. And then there's Heal My Heartache, which is a more deep dive, really understanding and transforming the patterns of abandonment, unrequited love, attachment wounds, and also building the foundation that makes healthy reciprocal love possible. You could find me on Instagram, and also I have my YouTube channel. So I will send the links for the show notes.
Okay, wow. All right. So yes, and when you send the links, I'm going to upload them, in my show notes. And when it releases, I'll let you know definitely. So yes, thank you, Ben. I think this has been amazing, like I said earlier. And my listeners are going to learn a lot. And talking about my listeners, I'll say thanks for tuning in to Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, just as it did in me, make sure to share to someone who you think might need this, and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Ben. And yes, do you have a wonderful day ahead of you? It was a pleasure
It's
having you
nighttime
on.
here, but it'll be wonderful. Thank you,
Oh,
Sekani.
okay. All
You're on the other
right.
side of the planet. I got
Oh,
a
wow.
message from a friend in Sri Lanka, Sugat, and he's going, "Good morning, Ben." And I'm like, Sugat, you do know the world is round, don't you?
Right. That's
I
true.
sent a photograph of it as pitch black because it was around midnight, but a lot of people forget about that.
Actually, yeah, people do actually, and it's actually 12 midnight here. Funny enough, like here
Oh,
in
it
Nigeria.
is?
Yeah, it
Oh,
is
okay.
actually.
Oh, I see. Well, forgive me too, because living among Kiowa Indians, their sense of humor kind of rubbed off on me, and so it can sound a
It's
little
fine.
irreverent. I had to really tone it down when I came back and was living in mainstream American society because people
Right, it's
didn't quite know
okay.
what to do with it.
It's fine. Me personally, I just assume like it's when it's night here, it's during the day over there, right? So I just assume everywhere it's like that. That's why I say, have a night, have a good day after this, forgetting sometimes it might even be in the night. So yeah, I totally understand that actually. So yes,
So, so Nigeria is parallel with like Western Europe, I guess.
yes, yeah, I think so
Okay,
actually. What
you're
what
in
time
that.
is it over there?
Right now, it's about 7 p.m. here in
Oh,
the on the
okay.
east coast of New York City, where I'm
Oh,
at. Yeah,
okay, that's like 6 hours back. Okay.
six
Um,
hours back. Okay.
right. So it's 12 already over here. So all right.
S-
So it has been I don't know, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now. Mhm.
All right, okay. So I'm even surprised you can hear me okay. At the beginning I was like, oh, should I turn off my video or what? But yes, I'm glad we were able to have a good conversation, Ben. And yes, thank you. Thank you for, agreeing to come on my podcast and sharing your insights with us. And you mentioned your website, right? I'm gonna check it out and see if I could find your socials there. So I could just follow on social media and probably, just connect with you. You don't mind,
Yeah, stay
actually.
connected. Yeah, I
All
would like
right,
that.
definitely.
So, yeah, just yeah, or send me yours and I'll follow you. Either way, I'll connect with you. You know,
All right.
I'm
Okay.
I'm
Thank
on
you, Ben.
I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I don't
Mm,
share um, I don't share the link to my Facebook because,
okay.
like being here in America, it's there's a very I mean, basically we have a dictator who's president right now, and so there's a lot of political stuff. There's a guy who started to interview me about a month ago, and he just shut it down after like 10 minutes because he's asking me a question about trauma, and I said matters are made worse now. A lot of us are being triggered because we have an insane president who's started a war,
Mm.
and uh, prices are going through the ceiling, and many people are just struggling to survive. And so because I post a lot of political stuff on the Facebook, I usually don't share that link because some people get upset or offended at me
Yeah,
because of it.
right.
It's a third of our population is in a cult here in America, a whole third of our population. I mean, it's just it's so disappointing in a way, that it's like this nonsense of American exceptionalism. We're actually pretty dumb here. A big portion of our population, and
Mm.
yeah, it's like God. I never imagined like what's going on here, and so I'm working to reach people around the world, and I'm considering possibly relocating overseas or something. Just maybe work remotely overseas because um, crazy things are happening. I mean, they're building all these detention centers, and just they've actually shot protesters, shot them dead, and it's like some really bad things happen. So there's um, the people like myself who are pro-democracy are really fighting hard, trying to prevent it from sliding altogether into autocracy. So there's um, it's
Mm.
yeah, and our
Right.
economy is really suffering because of all this craziness
Mm.
too. So yeah, so
Mm.
that's why I don't
Mm.
share the Facebook because
I
but
totally understand, actually. You know, when you say crazy things are happening, I want to say you don't want to imagine what's going on in Nigeria currently. I mean, ooh, crazier things right happening in Nigeria.